So, who is Scott Tibbetts? How did you get started in the space industry?
I'm not a rocket scientist. It didn't start that way at all. When I grew up, I used to watch the Apollo stuff, and so wanted to be in space. And we used to watch it with my dad. And there was always a leaning. It's like, yeah, maybe there's some way. But I'm an engineer, chemical engineer, and was actually in the nuclear weapons business. But just had this desire to be in an entrepreneurial world, and had me leaving nuclear weapons to work with this guy in a little garage in Boulder, Colorado, making water heaters. I mean, home water heaters. He was like an inventor. And a device came of it that was just really interesting. It was like the kind of invention you look at and say, there's got to be other uses for this, like Velcro or something like that. And it was a copper pipe filled with wax. And when you'd heat it, the wax would melt and expand and create pressure, and it'd push a rod out. You could put it in a coffee cup. And I made this deal with this guy that if I could find another use for this, maybe we'd be partners in the company. He said, okay, sure. We just shook hands. And so I stopped getting payroll from him. And I was 28 years old, and I could live on nothing and macaroni and cheese. So for a year, I started calling into industry saying, hey, can you use this device? It's really neat. And called medical and nuclear and all kinds of industries. And I ended up calling NASA at JPL, Jet Propulsion Laboratory. And they said, yeah, come on out. We want to see what you got. So I took a little cardboard box with this device in it, hopped on a plane, flew out to Pasadena, and walked into JPL. I'm just this guy with a cardboard box and devices, and I'm with all these rocket scientists. And I just remember this feeling of, oh my gosh, I'm with the people that went to the moon. Maybe I could be a part of this. And so we met with the guys, and it turned out they had a mission going to Saturn. And they were trying to get rid of explosives on the spacecraft to open things up because it has to unfurl. And our device did that. And they said, this actually is gentle. This is great. If you build it, you could sell it for spacecraft. And I went back to Boulder wondering if maybe this one meeting had changed my life. I remember driving down in going, life might be different. And that turned out to be the case. We took about 9 months to find somebody that was actually willing to buy one. And we sold it, and it went on a spacecraft. And once you sell one into the aerospace industry, then they think you're legitimate. And so from that point forward, we just grew and grew and grew and grew. And all of a sudden, we looked up 20 years later, we were 150 people. We were building mechanical systems for every spacecraft in the world. Kind of went, wow, we became rocket scientists. So it really was a invention in a garage that turned out that we ended up being involved in all kinds of great stuff.
Tell me about some of the other projects you were involved with. What are some of the other spacecraft that your hardware's flown on?
Well, the ones that people are familiar with, probably the big one are the Mars rovers. NASA decided, as they do, particularly the different agencies, JPL in particular is very good at things, which means they try to do them themselves. And they decided to build their own gearboxes. And all of a sudden, it wasn't working. And they were having failures, and they weren't going to be able to get to Mars. And so we're about the only other people that could do gearboxes for spacecraft. And we got a call saying, we're in a lot of trouble. We need you to do all these for us. And so we built basically all the gearboxes on the Mars rovers. There's about 50 of them. Huge program for us. So they thought that these motors were going to be one of the reasons the rovers couldn't go more than a month. But these actuators ended up lasting for years. And those little things that drive those rovers around are our motors. And the things that drive the cameras. That was exciting. That was a big one for us all. We built a docking system, something called Orbital Express, which a lot of people don't know, for spacecraft coming together. Pretty much every planetary probe has our hardware on it. And actually, what's kind of nice about having your own space company is my kids get to have their names on planets. So, like, for instance, when we were going to Mars, my son came into the company, and we found a little cover that was going on one of them. And I sat down there with him. He was like, 7 years old, and he gets the etch tool, and we had him sign his name. And I just remember this experience of having my arms around him, and he's signing his name on something that's going to go to Mars. So when he's at show and tell, he has this, hey, my name's on Mars kind of thing.
With what's going on in space today, especially with the commercial Crew program, excuse me. Obviously, you have a vested interest in the Dream Chaser space
Yeah.
plane, but what other companies are you rooting for? What else gets you excited about what's going on presently?
I'm just really pleased with what Elon's doing with SpaceX. I was there, pretty involved when the first ones weren't working, and I remember watching him present. And it's a whole different feeling when you're on the front end of it. You're watching somebody, you have no idea whether it's going to be successful, and he's had 2 failures, and you're just wishing the very best for him. And man, he pulled it off, and his timing was extraordinary. And Dream Chaser I love because it's a winged vehicle. It's sexy, it's cool, it's a little rocket ship that you can fly. And I think it's really important that we have as a nation something that just doesn't look like something that we did before in a way. Like Dragon, oh my gosh, it just makes total sense. And they're gonna pull it off. I'm very excited about what they're doing. They're doing it right. And he wouldn't have been able to get much outside money to get it started. He used a lot of his own money, and now it's looking real smart. So, and then having Tesla go on in parallel, how cool is that? So SpaceX, hats off there. What Bigelow's doing is really fascinating because it's the whole other side of it. It's like, how quietly can I do this, but actually do something that's really going to rock the world? Those are the 2 big ones that stand out. It's far beyond the scope of anything I'm ever involved in. Many, 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 many fewer zeros. But oh my gosh, I really appreciate what they're up to. So those are the 2 that really stand out.
So, given the opportunity, would you want to be a tourist in space? Would you want to fly to space yourself?
That's a good question. Different times of life, I would have said in a heartbeat. If I had the money to do it, I think now I would. I don't know if I would have earlier when my kids were younger. It doesn't have I'll do anything pull to it like it does for an astronaut. The astronauts have really taken huge chunks of their lives and committed. They basically said, I'm going to take this big chunk of life and invest it in order to be able to fly in space a few times. And I don't think I've got that kind of pull. But oh man, if somebody said, hey, I got a ticket for you, I'd be all over that.